Welcome to another edition of the Digital Download, which is
the
longest running
weekly
business talk show on LinkedIn Live.
Now syndicated.
Now globally syndicated on the IBGN radio network.
Yeah.
We're getting there. Yes.
But by the time we've learned that perfectly, you do know there'll be something else to add in, and we'll be back to square one again, won't we?
Yeah.
Oh, most definitely. At this point, that's almost the challenge. All right. So today, mind the gap. Today, we're talking about the widening gap between buyers and sellers. We have a special guest, Kerry Cunningham, to help us with the discussion. A renowned expert in B2B demand generation and management, Kerry currently spearheads research and thought leadership at 6 Sense. But before we bring Kerry on, let's go around the set and introduce everyone. While we're doing that, why don't you in the audience reach out to a friend, ping them, and have them join us? We strive to make the digital download an interactive experience. Audience participation is highly encouraged. All right. So with that, Adam, would you kick us off, please?
Hello, everybody. I'm Adam Gray. I'm co-founder of DLA Ignite. And this kind of current research and thinking of how buyers and people in the sales industry are actually behaving rather than how we think they are behaving is a fascinating topic, and one that's been close to Tim and my heart since we started the company. So I'm really looking forward to today.
Excellent. Thank you. Tracy.
Good morning, everyone. I am Tracy Borison, founder of TLB Coaching and Events, a proud partner of DLA Ignite. And I'm really interested in this because I usually come from like the marketing angle. So when we think about this widening gap between buyers and sellers, the thing I immediately hear is marketing is not doing its job. So I'm super interested to hear where we go today.
Excellent. Thank you. Tim.
Hi, I'm Tim Hughes. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite. And I'm famous for writing the book, Social Selling Techniques to Influence Buyers and Changemakers.
So
Welcome.
famous.
Thank you. And Alex.
Good afternoon, all. Alex Abbott, aka the bearded sales guy. Not quite famous just yet for that, but getting there. Before we kind of get on to a serious note of buyers and sellers and misalignment,
Is that a bomb?
there's
No, I think your lunch is ready.
my hydrogen water is ready. I know how much you love that, Tim. And it's been playing on my mind, Tracy. We were talking before we went live about Saskatoon. And is it Saskatoon? I was thinking, where do I know that from? And it's the film Grown Ups. Do you
Yes.
The Canadian lifeguard with a really high-pitched voice.
Yes, Adam Sandler loves to have a good time with the Canadian accent.
Yeah.
I think Saskatoon,
Which most of us don't have, by the way.
Saskatoon is the state capital of Saskatchewan, isn't it?
Saskatchewan. Provincial capital is how we refer to it. We don't
Sorry.
have states.
Yes. Sorry.
Yeah, well pronounced. I struggled with that one.
Most people struggle with Saskatchewan.
Yes, that one. Yeah, I too am a proud DLA Ignite partner, and I'm looking forward to today's discussion.
Excellent.
And Alex is nowhere near Saskatoon, just in case you're wondering.
Okay. Now I know.
Thank you for that, Alex. And myself, I am Rob Durant. I am founder of Flywheel Results. I too am a proud DLA Ignite partner, and I am not yet famous for anything.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Yet. With that, let's bring on our guest. As I said, this week on the Digital Download, we'll speak with Kerry Cunningham. Having run a third-party BDR organization as the VP of Operations for 12 years, Kerry oversaw 500-plus BDRs. As Vice President and Principal Analyst at Forrester, He co-authored foundational frameworks like the B2B revenue waterfall. Now Kerry brings over 25 years of experience in B2B demand generation and management to 6 Sense, where he focuses on bridging the gap between marketing and sales. Let's bring him on. Kerry,
Hey,
welcome.
Kerry.
Good
Good to see
morning.
you.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Yeah, good to see you as
Good
well.
morning.
Kerry, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Kerry, let's start. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you got here?
Yeah. So right now I'm in one of the winter refuges for our Canadian friends. I live in Palm Springs, California, which is at this time of year about 60% Canadian, I think, which is nice. It's a much more polite town this time of year than it is.
That's because it was minus 27 degrees Celsius here yesterday. That's why
Yeah, and
Canadians go.
we complain because it was 72 Fahrenheit. It's a little cool this time of year. We actually have a minor league hockey team here in the desert where it's 115 in the summertime. So give you a sense for that. But I spent most of my adult life in San Francisco, and that's where our teleservices organization started. We expanded. We had a company. I spent half my time for 5 years in suburbs of Montreal in a town called Vaudreuil, which was very fun to learn to pronounce. And then I spent the last 10 years essentially as an analyst. So 8 years with Serious Decisions, and then Forrester Research after Forrester bought Serious Decisions. And virtually all of that time spent trying to help organizations improve their ability to convert leads into opportunities and revenue. And it was during that very futile period of time that we figured out that converting leads as such into revenue was the wrong thing to try to be doing. And that led to the development of Demand Unit Waterfall, which was one of the goofy name things that we developed in the B2B Revenue Waterfall and a bunch of other stuff. Moved over to 6 Sense about 2.5 years ago, doing the same thing. We actually have the solution to do it, which is why I finally made the move, like started talking about it without being able to say, here, go do this. So that's me.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, Kerry, before we talk about results and takeaways, can you give us some background information on the two studies that we're going to be discussing today, the 2023 B2B Buyer Engagement Report and the 2024 State of the BDR Survey?
Absolutely. And I may bring in a couple of other studies that we've done recently.
Please do.
We've been busy. So last summer, we surveyed almost 1,930 something recent buyers in B2B. And that's people who made a legit B2B purchase over the last 24 months at the time we surveyed them.
Sorry, Kerry, what do you mean by a legit B2B purchase?
10K in annual value or more.
Okay.
And so we may actually drop that because I've had a lot of complaints from some of our customers and other folks that I've talked to that number is a little too high. But we wanted to make sure that we were talking to people who are making considered purchases, let's say. And so we asked them about their buying process. And that's really where a lot of the insights we'll talk about, I think, today come from. We followed that up with another study that I'll mention here. We haven't talked about yet, but last year we did a study called the Buying Signals Survey. This year we renamed it and we called it the Buyer Identification Study for reasons that I could go into. But in any case, it's about how marketers identify buyers. So we got this big study that says, here's what it looks like when buyers are buying. And we've got this other one that says, and here's what it looks like when marketers are trying to identify buyers who are buying. And man, those things don't look very much alike. They don't intersect all that much. And then we also just published on Monday our State of the BDR report and benchmark. And there we surveyed just under 300 BDRs this year and asked them about their jobs and how they go about their jobs. We have some really good news about the BDR function. A lot of lot of what we find is kind of like an antidote to what you read on LinkedIn every day. Love LinkedIn, but man, the news on LinkedIn is like, don't look at it in the morning, right? It's like a little depressing. And what we find when we interview individual people is it doesn't look like that. So anyway, that's the study that we just did on BDR. Some good news, some not so great news, but what we find is that the BDR function is more aligned to the way buyers buy now than the way marketers are marketing. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And
This is what I keep telling the world. Marketers are the problem.
what would you say are some of the key findings of each?
So if we start with the buyer, the buyer experience study, pardon me, little morning fraud.
It's early for you.
It is. If we start with the buyer experience study, what we find is that buyers say that 70% of the time, or that they don't talk to sellers until they're 70% of the way through the journey. And I always say, that's not new. We've known that for a while from other research. What I liked about seeing that was that it tells us we're talking to the same kind of people that everybody else has been getting data from in the past. These are normal buyers. What they also told us, though, is that when they do have contact with sellers for the first time, they initiate that contact 83% of the time. And so that's something I think we have to put in our little sales pipes and smoke a little bit, because what that is telling us is that buyers really do control when they're going to interact with sellers. And to some extent, it doesn't matter how much you're pinging them, emails, phone calls, social touches. They'll respond when they're ready. So I said 83% of the time they initiated contact. We looked at the other 17, right? Because there's 17 who said that, no, my first contact came when I responded to a seller. That happened at 70% also, like exactly at the same time. So what that tells us is that whether they respond or whether they initiate, it's going to happen at about 70% of the way through the buying journey. So we have that. We have buyers being completely in control. And then we said, no, when you had that first interaction, which now we know that you initiated, did you have the first interaction with the vendor that you ultimately bought from, or did you have your first interaction with some other vendor? And this was the staggering number. 84% of the time, buyers said that their first interaction was with the vendor that they ultimately bought from. And so when I say that to folks, I always say, look, there's two possible explanations. One is, after I've gone through 70% of my journey with a team of 10 people, having had thousands of interactions already, digital interactions, I picked a vendor at random from my list, and that first conversation was so compelling that I bought from that vendor 84% of the time. Like, I don't think that's too likely of an explanation. What I think the explanation really is it takes 70% of the journey for the buying team to decide what they want and who they want to buy it from. And then, like all the rest of us, when we're going out to buy a car or look at houses or something, we've got our list of favorites, and we start with the one that we want to buy. And we hope that we don't have to do anything else.
No.
That's where we start and we go first. And that decision doesn't change very much after that. And that last 30% of the buying journey is not about deciding what to buy. It's about validating a decision that we've already made.
So may I ask, does that data, because I used to be in marketing, and now I see marketing as being
The problem.
Tim gave me this phrase, the colouring in department.
Sure.
And I love that, because for the most part, they are going through the motions of creating messaging for people. And
I'm offended by that, just so you know.
I know, and I'm partly saying it for your benefit, Tracy. And 9 times out of 10, people don't read the stuff that's sent to them anyway, because too much is sent by too many different people all arriving at the same time.
Yeah.
So if 84% of the time the buyer reaches out to me to buy from me because they want to buy from me, I don't need to be a salesman. I need to be a shopkeeper. Is that what that research is telling me?
If this were B2C, I would say yes. But because it's not, I think there are some other considerations. And by the way, your reaction is the first reaction of a lot of the salespeople that I've talked with about this. And the first thing I did when we saw these numbers was I said, holy, and I went and talked to our own salespeople, including our head of sales, about this. That's the first reaction. But then when we think about what enterprise, especially kind of mid-market enterprise on-up sales reps do in B2B, is they spend a lot of time mapping the accounts, understanding who's inside them, and whether they're thinking about it this way or not, delivering useful content to buyers without having conversations with them. Every sales rep and SDR, BDR knows that you make 1 billion phone calls and send 1 billion emails without getting any response. Well, one thing to know is that they're not responding to you, but they are looking at your content and they are engaging with whatever it is you give them. Now, what I would say is, if what you're delivering to them is a request for a meeting and nothing else, then you're not doing anything to help them buy from you. But if what you're doing is engaging in the practices that my understanding from talking with lots of sales reps is, if what you're really doing is you're delivering value in those one-way interactions, you're saying, hey, we've got this content over here, we've got this event over here, we have subject matter experts you could talk to, we have a community that we sponsor, we do all of these things. If you're delivering those kinds of experiences, then you are influencing those buyers, but you're not going to get the meeting until they've decided that you're on the short list and you're one of the vendors that they're going to talk to. And I think that's the big difference in the understanding. And by the way, so this dovetails with the BDR report. So we did the buyer experience study before we did the BDR report. And so when we did the BDR survey, we put in a bunch of questions about, do you, in the course of your job, invite prospects to communities your company sponsors? Do you deliver value-added content of various kinds? Do you invite them to events of kinds? So we give this long list of things that we ask BDRs, do you do? There are things other than asking for a meeting. And what we found is, I think more than 50% of the BDRs are already doing lots of those things all the time. In other words, they are doing things that are delivering value to potential buyers on the way to trying to get a meeting. And to me, that's what's really, really critical here. So does that help at all? I hope it does.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that getting your insight of this, because a lot of the percentages that we see in your reports, and indeed all research begs some obvious questions. And for the people viewing this, and for us on the panel, it's a good idea to ask the obvious questions, because that's what everybody's thinking.
Yeah, exactly.
We have a question from our audience. Speaking of questions from the audience, Robert Matson asks, is that 70% point the start of the shortlist?
It's the start of engagement with a shortlist. So the 70%. So the way I think about this, so the average B2B buying process in our survey was 11 months long, which corresponds pretty nicely to what a typical enterprise B2B process is. So in that 11-month process, first interactions with sellers are happening at the 8-month mark, roughly. And that's when, so that first 8 months is about doing the research to understand who's on the short list and then putting that short list in an order. Right? So it's not just that there is one, that short list is ordered. And so at the time you get to that 70% mark and you start interacting with vendors, you're now validating that short list and the order in which it exists is what buyers are doing.
And this is from the buyers. So this is buyers answering questions related to the processes they're following.
That's right. Yeah.
So is there a period of time before they decide, they're still doing some evaluation, chatting to people before they go, right, now the clock's started?
Well, So yeah, I mean, there's 8 months where they're out looking around and deciding. And I think, one of the other things that's really important to understand is they're talking to all kinds of people. So it's like 70%, I forget the exact number, it's in the report, but a very large percentage of buyers say that, for instance, they work with consultants and analysts in helping them buy, right? It's like a very high number, which is totally gratifying because that's what I used to do. But it's a very high number, and of course they love talking to existing customers of vendors that they're evaluating, and that's one of the recommendations that we make very strongly. Is if you've got customers who are advocates for you, make them available to your buyers without having to go through your sales reps. If they have to go through your sales reps, they're not going to do it prior to 70%.
Yeah.
If you want it to help them make a decision for you, you've got to get them out in front so that your buyers can see and find and talk to them prior to that. They're going to talk to analysts. So if you don't do anything and you don't think analysts and consultants are important for you to market and sell to, then you should change your attitude about that right now. Right. The same thing would also go to agency partners and folks like that they work with. I mean, they're relying on lots of people to help them make decisions and their peers, but they're just not. They don't want to be sold. They want to make a decision and then do their final evaluations.
Yeah, we talk a lot. Sorry, go on, Rob. Go on.
I was just going to ask: do you have any questions to the BDRs regarding outreach to the consultants and analysts in the industry?
We didn't. That's a really good question. I don't think we've ever, I've never seen that, and I don't think I would. And no offense to BDRs with whom I spent a lot of my life, but I don't think I would have a BDR SDR kind of level resource doing that.
Right.
That's usually, like your analyst relations person's usually a pretty senior person, because analysts and consultants are pretty tough, and they ask tough questions, and you've got to be on your game and really know your stuff. But I think it's important, developing better programs to make sure that even if you're outside, like I don't know anybody who actually outside of analyst relations conversations has marketing programs directed at them. I don't know anybody who does that. Maybe folks do, but I think folks should, and whether analysts say they're looking at it or not, they'll look at it. They want to know.
Yeah. So what you're saying, Kerry, is it's almost too late. So if the salesperson hasn't engaged with the buyer prior to them deciding that they have a need, if they're not the first one to be contacted, it's essentially too late, because they've only got a very small chance of winning that deal.
Well, you may have a really big one, or you may have a really small one, but you won't know which, and you won't have controlled that, or you won't have managed that to the extent that you can. So, at the point where a buyer, and there's a couple of other really, to me, fascinating stats, 3 out of 10 people who are part of a buying team that will buy from you will fill out a form on your website to see content, right? So just 3 out of those 10 people. But we know that statistically anyway, all 10 of them will come to your website, and there's not much difference. Like from senior executive on down, there's really not very much difference in how much activity they engage in during that buying process. The difference is between like 18 for director level and 14 for the most senior folks. They're all doing a bunch of research on their own. You can bet that the more senior folks are never going to fill out a form. But 7 out of those 10 people are on your website and never filling out a form. But 50% of buying team members will at some point reach out to somebody on the seller side for more information, right, when they need something. So they're more likely to go ask you for it than they are to go to your website and fill out a form to get it, because I think everybody is so form focused.
Kerry, can I ask a question? To go back to what Alex said, if we're in this situation where people are now 70% of the way through the buying process before they ask, except if the flip side of that is in the world of SaaS and cloud, current VC advice is to only go for organizations that are in market.
Right.
That means that there's a big disconnect.
Well, not necessarily, and that would be our advice too. But I think we have to define terms. So
Right.
when we say in market, and not to pitch, but like the thing that Sixth Sense does is it tells you not only which ones are showing signs of being in market, like basic intent data says here they look like they're in market because there's a surge of activity. But what
Sure.
we really want to know is, okay, where? Because like statistically and just by logic, most of those that are just making some noises and now doing some research are not going to be very far into a journey, and most of those will not even complete it. So what we really want to know is which ones are really serious. And so if you think of 8 months of research, there's a spectrum from poking around and doing a little bit to, holy crap, this thing's getting serious. We're actually probably going to buy something. We built a business case already. We've still got a lot of work to do to decide which vendor. So where you want to be is understanding which ones are somewhere between the, okay, this is real, and we just decided which vendors are on the short list, and you need to be blowing out your marketing budget and have your sellers, where possible, in those accounts, mapping them and influencing them the way you talked about for that set of accounts. Now, the good news is that's going to be a small set of accounts, relative to your total addressable market. That isn't going to be very many. And that's kind of the whole point. So you've got all of these accounts that are kind of in market, and that's a small fragment of all of the accounts. So for the ones that are kind of in market, brand and awareness content, maybe light lead gen, high scale, low cost stuff. But then for that very small fragment that is, say, between 30 and 60% of the way through their journey, they need to know that you love them deeply and will be a great, great partner for them, right? And they need to, if you have content that is behind the form, then seller's job is to get that content and get it out from behind the form and get it into the inbox of whoever needs to see it.
Yeah.
If you have customers that they could be talking to, any of that stuff has to happen in that phase.
Now, I think I'm playing devil's advocate. I have a kind of an issue with this idea of intent data, and I hope you don't mind this this discussion, Kerry. Let's have a good debate, because the signal comes, right? There's intent within these accounts, and then the salesperson goes tooth and nail to get into that account by hook or by crook. Yeah. But there is no trust or relationship yet. And therefore, does the intent data not carry the value that it could have? Should the reps not be building relationships in their accounts anyway and finding this stuff out?
They should. So I think what you're pointing to is a big disconnect in the way that the market has thought about intent data. And it's mostly the fault of the people who sell intent data, who've been overselling it for now 7 years.
Right.
I first wrote a report and framework about this 6 years ago at Serious Decisions. So intent data is a signal, the same way your leads are a signal. Now, if your leads are a signal, they're a very bad one. 1 out of 100 of them turn into revenue. But intent data is a much worse signal by itself. So it doesn't have a name attached to it. It doesn't have people that you can call. By itself, it's terrible. The anonymous traffic on your website is another one where you can de-anonymize the traffic on your website. That's intermediate between a lead and third-party intent. But if your lead is bad, then the anonymous traffic is also bad and slightly worse. And then the third-party intent is worse than that. When you think about just sending sales reps after them, I mean, doing that is a last resort. It's much better than saying, here's a set of accounts we think are good, go after them. I mean, if you can know which ones of those are showing some intent, then that's better than just sending them into the account naked. But what you really want to do is combine those signals. with whatever other signals that you have, right? Because none of them are very good by themselves, but when you combine them and triangulate on which accounts are showing signals across all of these different channels, now you have a signal that is much, much more reliable. And that's what we really want. And so ultimately, what we really want is we want a full accounting. And this is the way I talk about it, nice accounting language. We want a full accounting of where all of the accounts in your ICP are relative to a buying journey. And we know that most of them will not be in one. And that's the first thing we want to know. Which ones are not? And then let's, a little brand and awareness or whatever, leave them alone. Even if they come to your website and fill out a form, if one guy from one of those ICP accounts comes to a website and fills out a form and there's no other signal, leave them alone. They're not in market. Let them look at your stuff. But then for the rest of them, we want to know, where are they in that journey? And if they're early in the journey, that's marketing's job. Engage them, high scale, low cost until we know something more, then higher cost and lower scale when we know something more, until we know that this is one where they're going to buy from somebody and our sales reps need to be in there. If they're really big accounts, strategic accounts for you, then your sales reps are going to get in there much earlier than that. They're going to map the accounts. They're going to try to develop relationships. They're going to do all kinds, they're going to be in there all the time. And so they'll end up having some more conversations that happen earlier in a buying process because you've developed relationships with them, and that changes the game. If they're enterprise or mid-market where you can't have that kind of relationship with every account, then you're probably not going to be having conversations with them, but you will be able to map the accounts, understand who they are, and do the kind of stuff we talked about earlier. Does that make sense in terms of the intent data and its use? So last ditch is always using it to have sales reps chase after it.
So I've got a couple of questions which are kind of interlinked, and I kind of know what I want the answer to be, but I'm going to ask them to you as a question.
Adam, can I interrupt before you ask?
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure we address some of the comments from the audience. Robert Matson says, analysts are really busy and rely on vendors to update them. If vendors don't do it proactively, then they have no one but themselves to blame. Hashtag commenting for a friend.
That's fair.
And then Dan Rockwell shares with us, intent can model with time and seasonality. Thank you both for sharing your insights there.
Yeah.
Adam, the microphone is yours.
Yeah, so a little while earlier on, you said that pretty much everybody that's going to buy from you is going to come to your website. And some people, 30%, will fill out a form. So they'll kind of expose who they are. And the other 70% won't. But across all of that 100%, 50% of them will reach out to somebody in the seller. So the first question is this. How do they decide who they're going to reach out to? So Alex and Tim and myself used to work for Oracle. It's a company of 220,000 staff.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of buying a new,
Accounting system.
Yeah, accounting system. How am I going to pick the one person? I'm looking for the Tim Hughes.
Yeah.
And how can I pick the Tim Hughes rather than the Alex Abbott out of the 220,000 people? That's the first question.
Okay. A couple of possibilities on that first, because I won't remember the first if you tell me the second. So a couple of possibilities there. One is a lot of that reaching out is probably happening after the 70% point. So we're already now in that validation phase, and I needed a piece of information and I know who the sales rep is, so I'm reaching out. Some of it is probably happening because I've been getting emails and phone calls from these people for a long time now that I've been ignoring. And so I know who they are because they've been reaching out to me, and I reach out to them when I need something. Now, that what we would have a very difficult time teasing apart is somebody who says, I reached out proactively, but I did it because I got an email 3 months earlier. Right. And, that happens in sales all the time. Right. You're emailing somebody, and then 6 months later they respond. Well, in their mind, they're not responding. In their mind, they're proactively reaching out to me because now is the time when they need to.
Right. Okay. That's kind of what I thought was the situation. So the other one is this, and actually I'm quite militant on this view, and this view may prove to be wrong. So buyers are 70% of the way through the buying journey before they reach out to the seller to say, I'd like a little bit of help with this. And during that time, they've specified the solution to the problem, and they've identified who are the prospective vendors of that or providers of that service. And they've ranked those vendors from whatever criteria they determine to be important, from most attractive to least attractive. And then they reach out to those in turn. That makes perfect sense. The problem is that most people in the B2B space are selling something which is incredibly complex. And the buyer, by virtue of the fact that they're not a seller of this product, are relatively ignorant about what the scope of the possibilities looks like, and indeed what the solution is. So isn't this like giving a child a series of components and saying, well, all the bits you need there to put the computer together are in the box, put them together and make a computer, when the child can barely speak? So how do we get to the point where we know what the right solution is? How do I get to the point where I can educate the buyer enough that the right solution is my solution, given that every vendor in the marketplace says, my product's best, my product has got these 150 different functions, and we're market leader?
Yeah. Well, I think, I think one of the things at this point, so as much as salespeople were initially not happy with me, brand people absolutely love this research. Because one of the things I think it does say is that people are not, and this is true, you know, this was part of the genius of Steve Jobs is, yes, you know, when people were buying PCs for the first time in their lives, they're very complicated machines who have lots of different functions and all of that. But what Steve Jobs' insight was, but yes, they're going to want the pretty one. And that is true. It's the same with a car. It's the same with a lot of things. They're very complicated and all kinds of things, but we buy the ones that we think are pretty, or whatever our version of pretty is for that thing, whatever we instinctually like on a gut level. Now, we may go through all kinds of decision trees on our own with the stuff that we can know to come to that decision, but ultimately we're going to buy based on the consensus that a buying group has about which vendor is going to be the best partner for us in accomplishing whatever it is that we want this technology or machine or whatever to do. And the extent to which you can help your buyers understand what that relationship is going to be like is the extent to which I think you win deals, or lose them if you do a crap job of it. But like, if you do a good job of enabling buyers to get all of the information they need, and you talk about things in a way that they can understand, your content delivers the information in language that's familiar to them, in formats and structures and channels and media that is friendly to them, then you will feel like a really good partner, even if your buyer isn't explicitly saying that. And I think that that's one of the things that we haven't really thought nearly enough about in B2B is, you know, all of the stuff that's on your website, every bit of content, all of that sales process, it's all auditioning to be a business partner, which is what your buyers need. They need somebody who's going to help them solve a problem.
Yeah, I love the fact that you said the genius of Steve Jobs is that they're going to buy the pretty one. And, you know, when we are talking to help clients with their customer acquisition, we're often saying to them, people will make the obvious choice. You need to make sure that you look obviously better than everyone else. Whether you are or not isn't the issue. It's whether they think you are, whether you look better. That's the key thing here.
Well, and I'm wondering too if there is like this alignment or belonging component, because one of the things that I find very impactful from a marketing, storytelling, and community building perspective is going out and saying like, hey, we're this fintech, and yeah, there's 800 other fintech companies, but this was the gap that we saw in all the other fintech companies. And so we are here filling this gap. If this is the gap that you have, then here we are, the only one filling that gap. And that is messaging that aligns with specific people because they're like, oh, we too have experienced that gap, so now this makes sense. But you can also be saying that same message to people who have not experienced that gap, and they will be like, meh.
Yeah.
And so it's about it's interesting because when we were talking about intent data, these are the types of things that I always recommend people to like put out into the market to allow people to show. Maybe I wouldn't necessarily call it intent, but it would be alignment, that they are aligned with your business purpose, aligned with your business ideas, why you do what you do. And so maybe they need what you have right now, which is a small group of people, or maybe you're the person who now is like fixing that gap in the market in their minds. And then they can now go out and be like, hey, did you know that these people are doing this over here?
Yep. No, totally. And I think you kind of touched on this early on, but it's cliche to say that people want and crave connection. And that's true even of introverts, especially in a world in which you can be connected digitally and on your own terms. It's what you're doing here right now with this show, is you're connecting people around common things. I think that that's been really undervalued in B2B. And if there are two vendors that do the same thing, and one of them connects you to the rest of the world of people who practice what I practice, who do the job that I do, I'm going to want to be with that vendor, right? These two things do the same thing, but with this one, I get connected to all of my peers and resources and all of that stuff. With this one, I get the job done. Okay, which of those two things am I going to want? And I think that's very undervalued so far in B2B.
Kerry, can I ask you a question about the BDR report?
Yeah. Please.
There was a number of things that came out to me. One was that, and you said at the beginning about LinkedIn, because there's lots of people on LinkedIn saying the BDR SDR is dead.
Yeah.
Or we fired all our BDRs or whatever. Whereas your report shows that actually it's not.
Right.
Oh yeah, I would love to hear how they have not yet been replaced by AI.
And also, it was interesting that the amount that people were investing in that was actually going down. But the more you invested in it, the more successful the people were.
All right. So if you start first, we found, I think, I may not get these numbers exactly because I'm not looking at it right now, but I think 52% of organizations BDR teams stayed the same size. Another 25 or so grew. But that leaves, about 25% that did shrink. So 25% shrinking is not insubstantial. And for years we would have seen, close to zero or, 10% or something like that. So a bunch of shrinking, but the vast majority are staying the same or growing. And their quotas either grew or stayed the same 80% of the time. So what that tells you is most organizations were expecting to grow, right? So it's not just that we're doing more with less, but we're actually expecting and trying to grow with the teams. And then what we saw is that BDRs BDRs by and large did a better job of hitting their quotas in this past year than they had in the prior year. We compare year over year. And so there were more of them, their quotas were higher, and they actually did better. Great news there. We also saw that the BDRs who had higher quotas than the year prior were the ones who were more likely to exceed or attain their quota. Right? So higher expectations, and that probably points to the companies expecting to grow and being in a position to grow, having higher quotas, and then their reps went out and got it done. So, man, to me, that's great news, and it does counter the narrative of what you see constantly. Now, if you have a market where there's 25% of BDR teams are shrinking, you're going to hear a lot about that, and that's going to drown out. People don't come on LinkedIn to say we just added 2 people to our BDR team. That's just not not a thing people talk about. So to me, phenomenal news there.
Yeah. So I haven't read the full report. I've read the summary, Kerry, and I'm curious to know whether or not you've seen a change in role or a change in responsibilities with BDRs, because traditionally BDRs have folk, their job is to search and qualify or manage inbound, but essentially search and qualify. So they're always looking for that 5% of people that might be in market. But I kind of feel like, especially when I think about Matt Dixon's Jolt effect and he talks about kind of the importance of developing one's personal brand. Are you seeing the role change? Are you seeing BDRs making a move towards developing their personal brand and actually trying to build relationships? Or are they still stuck in this kind of insight-driven, let's search and qualify mode?
A lot more of the relationship building. We have a BDR for our company. It's got 17,000 followers or something like that on LinkedIn. We see a lot more of that, and that's why we asked the question about so we know that you go out and you ask for meetings and you try to qualify potential opportunities, and that's everybody's doing that. But what are the other things that you do, or do you do any other things? So back in my day running these functions, which would have been more than 10 years ago. But I also, when I was at Serious Decisions, I consulted with dozens and dozens of companies on this. And still the majority of BDRs were really only trying to get a meeting, trying to set up discovery calls. That's it. But more than 50% of reps are now doing a lot of other stuff that I would put in the category of relationship building. Whether it's relationship building for them, not as much, but relationship building between their company and people within the target accounts. And they're multi-threading like crazy, like overdoing it a little bit. So we saw an average of, I think, 6-ish people that BDRs are reaching out to in every account. Now, the really wonderful thing is here, they're doing that even if they're just following up on inbound leads, which to me, I wrote a brief about that 7 years ago at Serious Decisions. Like, never follow up on a lead again if that's all you're going to do. There's no reason to call into a single person inside an account if you're not going to do anything else. Like, if they ask you to call them and they don't pick up the phone, you should still try to find somebody else and find out what's going on. Why would that person have asked for that? Otherwise, leave them alone. So everybody's doing that now. That's the really good news. The average was 6 people, which is great. I think that's actually now excessive for a lot of companies and a lot of buying group sizes. If there's 10 people on a buying team and you're reaching out to 6 of them, okay, maybe that's okay. But if you're in a smaller deal environment and your buying team is 5 or 6 people and you're reaching out to all of them, there's probably a pretty good chance you're wasting time. If you get through 4 or 5 of them and they're not responding, or 3 of them and they're not responding at all over the course of a few weeks, I don't know. You're probably chasing your own tail at that point. But in any case, I'm really glad to see that multi-threading has taken hold, that BDRs are the vast majority of BDRs are passing opportunities to sales now, like the opportunity object and not a lead. So now that opportunity object can contain a lot more information, including multiple contacts. And so they're delivering content, they're inviting contacts to events and doing all kinds of things that build relationships with those folks, even if they're not getting the meeting right away. So the next thing that has to happen is we've got to look at compensation strategies, because all of the incentives are about getting meetings and discovery calls, right? So, and I think that's where I'm going to be focusing a little time and attention, is figuring out what do we do about compensation for folks whose probably their best purpose is in enabling all of these folks inside these accounts, but not getting immediate meetings. And how do we account for that? Especially
as we think about the importance of developing trust between, buyer and seller, or buyer and vendor, and how do you compensate for that, right? Because if you're still compensating on getting the meeting and the BDR is burning the opportunity because they're trying too hard, it's having a negative effect on your business. And it does. We saw that in the data. So we asked the question. So, we know that the average first contact happens at 70%. But we asked, all right, so if a buyer said that they initiated contact, when did that happen? If a buyer said that they responded and that was the first contact, when did that happen? What we expected was that
First contact, if they initiated it, would be later than if they responded. That's not the case. They're both 70%, right? So initiate or respond, it happens at 70. And then the other one was, if I said that I had my first contact with the winning vendor, when did that happen? If it was with somebody else, when did that happen? Winning vendor, 70%, because that's almost all of them. So that's the average. But if I had my first contact with a vendor who wasn't the winning vendor, it happened at 61% through the journey, 9 percentage points through the journey earlier, a month or so earlier, which tells you that getting them on the phone or getting them to respond an email earlier does not help your case. And it may be hurting it. That if you're hammering them so much that they respond, it's probably to tell you to buzz off.
Unless you've provocated their thinking earlier about a need, a problem they didn't realize they had, and you started that.
It could be some of that, but then, the numbers say, yeah, but they were less likely to choose you if you ended up having a conversation earlier. So I think it just means we have to put the buyer first. We have to enable the buyer to choose us, not enable me to get a meeting. And I don't think it's bad to say, hey, and I'd love to chat, or to put a meeting link at the end of the email or whatever it is. Of course, do that. No problem. But lead with what I'm doing for you, who are the buyer on the other end. And lead with it hard. Like, don't make it an even balance. It's got to be about the buyer and enabling them. You'll get the meeting, you'll get the call if you do that well.
Yeah, I can almost imagine it going into businesses' qualification criteria now. So what percentage are you through the buying process? Okay, hold on, I can't speak to you yet.
Because buyers are so good at answering that question.
Yes. If you get a hand raiser, you get somebody who says contact me, or they download a demo, you should absolutely ask them, were we the first vendor you contacted? Because if the answer is yes, 84% to win. If the answer is no, some fraction of 16%.
But you just said if they're too early, if they're first and too early, that has a negative effect.
That is, but I'm saying if they've raised their hand, so if the buyers initiated that contact already, now we're at 70% already. So that they've initiated that contact.
Got it.
And so if they initiate that, so then ask them, were we the first one you talked to? Because, and then you could have a frank conversation with them. If they say no, then you say, oh, okay, where do we kind of sit on your priority list?
Yeah. Am I just comparing to your favorite vendor because I'm not going to put that much effort into giving you a quote?
Well, and depending upon the kind of account it is, then you can prioritize, right? If it's a strategic account and one you really want to have, or you're desperate, then you're going to put your best foot forward anyway. But it'd be good to know.
Rob, Elizabeth Walker has asked the question: how can we add a taste of service along the way at this stage?
I think that's what you ought to be doing. So every way that you can audition how you provide value to the buyer is what you ought to be doing early on. So in terms of very specific techniques, I think it'll depend on what kind of solution you offer, what it is that you do. But I would always be thinking about, one, making sure that they have access to your good reference customers, so that they can tell you, those customers can tell them what it's like. But I know companies that have done, customer for a day kinds of things. What's it like to be a customer of us? Here, let's show you. Let's bring you in and show you what it's like, or give you a video that shows you what it's like. Whatever it is that you can do that's going to help you audition for being that partner. And I think, first of all, just get your content out in front of gates, make it good, use language that's common to your buyers that they understand, focus on clarity in everything that you do, so that your buyers have to, this is a staggering stat to me. If they're evaluating 4 vendors, that's 4,300 interactions for a buying journey. If they're evaluating 5, it's 8,000. That's how much harder just having one more vendor is. They got to double the work, right? So it's incredibly hard. We make it very hard because we talk about things in different ways. We differentiate ourselves by the obscurity of our language and all of that stuff. Focus on being clear, and where you've got comparisons with other vendors, make those comparisons, but make them very clear, right? And use the language that everybody else uses. And since they're talking to analysts and consultants, know what your analysts and consultants say about the solutions in the category and how they talk about it, and use that language.
Fantastic.
I know we're like right on the edge, but I just have a
We're
quick
beyond
question.
the edge.
A quick question for Kerry, because if we're talking about relationships and BDRs building more of the relationships, do you also see this as a shift for marketers to be investing more in those kind of relationships?
100%. And I'll use 6 Sense as an example. So we sponsor a CMO community that meets twice on Friday mornings, every Friday. We've sponsored that community for years. It has hundreds and hundreds of CMOs who attend that community every Friday morning. They're our chief buyer. We don't pitch. There's zero pitching in that. What we do is establish a way for those CMOs to have relationships with each other. And that's our role there. We have a community for BDRs, exactly the same thing, right? We just create a space where they can hang out.
It was interesting, Kerry. Derek Weeks, in his recent book, actually talks about your CMO community.
And we have others, and we'll continue to have others. Everything that I do is published in front of a gate. You don't have to go behind the gate. And my job is to be out and about and talking to folks and doing these kinds of things as well. I have lots and lots of conversations on LinkedIn, online, offline, with marketers and sellers who are not prospects or customers now. I'm part of our service to the community. That's my gig. And so marketers can do all of those things and a whole bunch more, right? All of the events that you put on or don't now, but should, all of those things I think are wonderful ways of building yourself into the community and making that community better.
Rob.
Kerry, this has been fantastic. Actionable insights, some tips that we can apply right away. Thank you for that. How can people get in touch with you? How can they learn more?
So 6sense.com/research. And we got a lot of it, as you probably will have gathered by now. And it's all there, freely accessible, no gates. And then you can find me on LinkedIn, Kerry Cunningham. I'm linked in the invite. If you're on this, my name is linked in there. You'll be able to find me pretty easily. And I post very frequently about the research and then other comments, gripes, and those kinds of things as well.
Hello, Nicholas.
Yes, Nicholas is here.
So thank you all for being a part of this. We now have a newsletter. Don't miss an episode. Get show highlights. I know there will be plenty from this one. And some beyond the show insights. You can also get reminders of upcoming episodes. Scan the QR code on screen or visit us at digitaldownload.live/newsletter. On behalf of our panelists, to our guest Kerry, and to our audience, thank you all for being a part of today's show.
Thank you, Kerry.
And we'll
thank
see
you very
next
much.
time.
Thank you for stepping in at very short notice as well.